Hello, friends. Welcome to the Wendland-Cook Program in Religion and Justice series on conversations about racial capitalism. I'm Francisco Garcia, and my guest is the Reverend Altagracia Pérez-Bullard. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with Altagracia because it's just so timely, and she has a wealth of experience both in ministry and theologically in her work that she's doing in the academy, to really ask these questions and to think about what's happening at this moment and where might we see promise, where do we see challenge, both theologically and in praxis on the streets. So Reverend Altagracia, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you. It's good to be with you, Francisco.
Yeah, and I'll introduce, give a little bit of a bio about you, and full disclosure here, we know each other. I consider Altagracia to be personally a mentor of mine because we're both clergy in the Episcopal Church, and I'll just share this little story. I was a young graduate student, and this is even before seminary, in urban planning. And I was, I'd been in organizing and activism, and there's this class that my professor's teaching on economic justice and housing issues in South Central and South Los Angeles. And in walks in this clergy, and I grew up Roman Catholic, so one, clergy person, a woman in a collar, a woman of color, and so many different things, talking about issues of justice and labor and why the faith community, why this matters. And it was just such an important moment for me at a very, in my early 20s. So I don't know if you've ever heard that story, but I had to share it with you.
I have heard that story. It makes me very proud.
Yeah.
Because I think you're amazing, and it's wonderful to think that I'm a part of your journey. That's great.
You planted some seeds early on for sure. So, okay, so, and now Professor Altagracia is the Director of Contextual Ministry and Assistant Professor of Practical Theology at Virginia Theological Seminary. She joined the faculty there in 2019, and her areas of expertise include practical theology, Latinx ministry, congregational development, education psychology, youth development, and community organizing. An amazing list. But she's got a wealth of knowledge before that. Years of ministry, in various churches in the diocese of New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, and so also being on the ground, connected as a community ally and organizer. So just grateful to have you here with us, and I want to just kind of jump into it. What are your thoughts about what's happening right now? And you can answer that in so many different ways. You could think about it theologically. You can think about it in terms of the church, in terms of the movement for Black Lives Matter on the streets. What are your initial thoughts about this moment?
I think it's a powerful moment. It evokes a lot of emotions. I have a lot of feelings about it and a lot of thoughts about it. Mostly they are hopeful. They are hopeful on many levels that because because of the COVID-19 virus and because of this moment where there's a reckoning around race and the arbitrary nature of the justice system and how unjust it can be, and there's an opportunity. I mean, what it does is it lays waste, like it just exposes what we've known about our infrastructure, about our human infrastructure, our care around human capital, our valuing of the lives of people on the margins, whether that be definitely Black lives, Black bodies, brown bodies, issues around trans Black women have come up in a very public way. And then even for people for whom that seems very removed and they only see it on TV, the reality of the cracks in the infrastructure of our healthcare system begins to, I think, provide the opportunity for people to pay attention, right? Like we're all like those of us who are comfortable are at home, and we are being given, not what we asked for, but a lot of time to consider the state of our healthcare system, of our economic system, of our safety net, of the value of the people that make the society function, and how little we value them, and yes, how critical they are to our sustainability, just for survival, and then of course, for the comfort that some of us get to have in terms of being able to work from home. So it's a hopeful moment because everything is being laid bare. And I'm prayerful that we will all take advantage to question and then begin to assess, like, what are the changes that need to happen to make us a more humane society that's about more than just money, right? That it's about other things that we say we value, but then we don't value in any real concrete way. So hopeful mixed with a lot of deep emotion as we see people really struggling and suffering and grieving in the midst of this current social moment.
Yes, and I like how you mentioned the being laid bare, and so you mentioned the infrastructure, and you mentioned obviously the system, and one thing that we're thinking a lot about at the Wendland-Cook program is this intersection of racial justice and economic justice, and we kind of think that a lot of people who are now looking at racial justice, and that's great, rightly so, that it's that there's an awakening around this issue. A lot of times the conversation does not continue to critique the economic system. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the relationship between these two things and where you see some openings.
Right. I mean, the sad thing is that the intersectionality of these things in people's lives means that some of us can afford to look at them one at a time, and for other people, they're living it all at the same time. So that the Black and brown bodies that sustain this economic system are also working in those industries that do not provide dignity for the laborer, that do not provide a living wage, that don't provide, days off, sick time, health benefits, like all of those pieces. We may be thinking about one or the other issue depending on which one is causing us greater anxiety. But for the people for whom this, who embody and who are living on the margins of this society, not because they in themselves, I mean, they're central in terms of the functioning of society, but they're living marginal lives because we are not equipped to provide them with basic things like a living wage, like supportive services, which some of us take for granted, right? Health benefits, sick days, the ability to take a day off because your child is sick. All of those things are now, of course, ramped up, right? Because suddenly, well, my grocery store needs to stay stocked, and if we don't get people out there spending money, then we're not going to have a sustainable economy. And I think that the intersection was always present for the people who were living that life, whose work we don't think about often. But for the rest of us, it's a wake-up call, right? That, oh my gosh, like, I can't think, just all the conversation right now about children needing to go to school. We have some really lofty ideas about public education and the importance of education for children.
Right.
We also know that without public education, right, the industrialization of this country could not have happened. And so now we're back there again. Like, how can we have the people to work and to thrive and to push the economy if there's no place for their children to go and be? So that all these things that nobody thinks about, right, that are all kind of connected, become critical, and especially for the people who are doing the most critical work, and not just, the medical professionals and the civil servants, but all those folks that are doing, we talk about the hospital, but nobody's looking at the orderlies and the people that keep the hospitals clean.
Right.
And people are worrying about funerals, but nobody's thinking about the people that work in the mortuaries and that move the bodies and that prepare the cadavers. And it's like, we only are here, and what we're beginning to have exposed for us is this whole layer of people without whose labor we would not be able to live the way that we live. So for me, they've always been intricately connected. Any issue that affects people in society in an oppressive way exponentially affects Black, brown, queer bodies, right?
Yes.
Like those are, they're getting the brunt of it. So those connections, and that's my hope, is that people will see how all these things are interconnected, and how each of us working, whether it's in the environmental movement or economic justice or, access to healthcare or whatever the justice movements we're called to serve, that we begin to not to understand, but to live more fully into the reality that we can't make any strides without each other.
Yes. That brings me to thinking about the role of both the academy and the church. And given your, you have a background in doing the organizing, from a faith perspective on the ground, and then now, in your teaching and research capacity at Virginia Seminary, what do you think are the implications for the way that we do theology, the way that we teach theology, the way that we are raising up people for ministry?
It's exciting. It is exciting because students, however challenging it may be, have the opportunity to think about things that sometimes surviving and the functioning of life doesn't give you the space, right? But the fact that you've got to go to class and you've got to read material and you got to reflect on it gives you the opportunity to uncover some things. I think it's challenging for students for whom ministry is a very a beautiful and staid space, and that's being disrupted in many, many ways. And in the Episcopal Church, I think we have, in a good way, a love and a value for the beauty of liturgy and of community. My hope is that the disruption of all of that will increase the curiosity of students about who they're ministering to or with, and then who are all those other people that are around their spaces, around their churches, their institutions, their organizations, that they're not remembering and that they're not ministering to, or that they're not engaging in any meaningful way, that this would invite them to rethink that. And also the importance of their call to invite other people to reflect on their own call, so that as those who are, and mostly we prepare many people for the priesthood in the Episcopal Church, among other ministries. But then what does it mean for me to be a priest in an Episcopal Church and support and encourage others to understand that God has a calling on their life as well? And that they're called in their lives, in their spaces, to be reflecting their faith values, their baptismal vows, the call of God on their life. So helping students to navigate their role as that kind of leader, not just one that comforts or sometimes challenges intellectually, but one who draws out and helps to form the body of believers so that they can engage the world in a meaningful way with what we consider to be good news, right? This is all about the good news.
Yeah.
So, what's the good news? What good news are you giving to all these people that are clamoring for the things that we say in my tradition that Christ stands for, right? That for righteousness and justice and compassion and love. How are we responsive to that? So I think it's a super rich environment in the seminary, and I know that we, and I'm sure many other seminaries, are asking the question, how do we not miss this learning opportunity, this teachable moment? How do we integrate it into the classroom so that it disrupts maybe the comfort of what it means to be a pastor who is pastoring, and challenges folks in the ways that they're being called to be transformational leaders for their congregations, for their neighborhoods, for the wider community, and for the world.
Mm. Now, how do you think that the church can speak and work prophetically, especially speaking of, the Episcopal Church, that's, our context, but obviously in relationship with many other traditions and other denominations. But speaking specifically about the Episcopal Church, we know that it is still a predominantly white denomination, and yet here we are, right, in our identities, trying to share the good news. So how do you see the role of the Episcopal Church, and maybe some of us who aren't part of the dominant demographic of the church sort of speaking, and maybe this is a place where your own sort of experience and or sort of social location informs your teaching and your praxis, and the way you think the church should work right now?
I mean, it's that whole like two sides of the same coin. I mean, I think the gift of my particular denomination of the Episcopal Church is that we are a liberal tradition, and that has its blessings and its challenges, to not call them curses. But one of them is that that we function, regardless of where we stand politically and ideologically and even theologically, there's an assumption that God is calling us to engage the other. I mean, not everybody says it that way, but that there's a sense that my neighbor is that one, right? That Samaritan is showing me who my neighbor is. It's that person that is injured, the person on the road, the person that's been abandoned by established institutions that are supposedly intended for the welfare of the common good. So I think that the church has an opportunity, and especially mainline denominations, to model what it looks like when we make a commitment to anti-racism, to economic justice, to eco-justice, like not because we have the answers or because we know how to do it or because the people in our churches look like the kingdom of God, but because we will be willing, God willing, to take the risk, right? To take the risk to lose ourselves so that we can gain our souls, right? To take the risk of walking, sometimes with fear, sometimes gently, sometimes stridently, because we don't know what the heck we're doing, but like to take the walk of what does it mean for me as a small church in most places, a white church in most places. How do I do anti-racism work? How do I question economic structures that seem to be leading some people with more than they know what to do with, and with others with barely enough to survive? Like, how do I live into those questions? How do I ask those questions? How do I invite other people into those conversations? We're in a church, my experience supporting congregations has been, we're in a church that prides itself on its good works, right? We love doing a food bank. We love doing a clothing closet. I mean, I would hope that people would see this moment as inviting them to take the next step of engaging those neighbors in a conversation, learning themselves, both about what God is calling them to do in the midst of these times and about their complicity, how our own comfort is bought at the price of somebody else's discomfort, and to figure out how to live into that so that we can show everybody else how to live into that. Like what does it look like when we're working on that? And it's not pretty at all. It's like that ugly cry face, right? It's not pretty, but what an incredible ministry it would be for us as communities of faith to take these issues seriously, to see what praxis, what action we can get engaged in. But praxis requires theological, prayerful reflection. It requires and assumes analysis and study as part of our action. So it's not just service, but it's that next step that strives for justice beyond just caring for people's minimal needs. Nobody stopped taking care of people's minimal needs, but then let's reflect about why is that necessary? Why are so many people hungry? Why are there lines of working class people? You know, these are not the super marginalized poor. These are working class people on food lines. You know, what is going on that is where we're living? And then what is God calling us to do about it?
Yes, thank you for that. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we know that this will be very beneficial to all of those who are checking out our website and our Facebook page to learn from real folks who are doing the work of linking the academy and theology and the practice of ministry. So it's so essential that we have thought and practice leaders like you helping show us the way. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for the conversation.